Welcome to Future Talk. On today's program, we're going to talk about some of the emerging new uses of computer graphics and how these new capabilities are affecting our lives in ever-increasing ways. My guest is Jon Peddie, president of Jon Peddie Research, a technically oriented consulting firm that specializes in everything having to do with computer graphics. He's the past president of SIGGRAPH Pioneers, which is an organization that promotes the development of computer graphics and tries to draw young people into the field. He's a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the CAD Society, whose goal is to create a feeling of community among people who work in the computer-aided design field. And he's also the author of the recent book, The History of Visual Magic in Computers. Jon, welcome to the program. Good to have you today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Jon, what would you say are some of the most exciting developments taking place right now in the field of computer graphics?
Oh, there's so many to choose from, but the big word today is virtual reality. I'm sure you've heard that.
Yes.
Where you immerse yourself in a headset and visit other worlds. Then there's augmented reality, where you see the real world, but it's augmented with information about the real world. At the same time, we have extraordinary developments in realism in cinemas and in computer games and in simulators to give us what are truly believable images that we can relate to and either use for practical purposes or for entertainment.
And we're going to talk about some of those things a little bit more, but I'd like to talk a little bit about your book. You brought a copy of it with you. Maybe we could take a look at that.
Just happen to have a copy here.
It's actually The History of Visual Magic in Computers. What's the main thing you're trying to get across with your book?
Well, there's a couple of points, actually. One is when computer graphics actually started. And because it's so prevalent now in our lives, we think that it's a recent thing, but it actually goes back quite far, back to World War II, believe it or not. That was the actual beginning of computer graphics. The other main thing is that there's a lot of people that are involved in it. I'd like to say that computer graphics has a lot of fathers. And so the book tries to trace the mathematical developments going back to the turn of the centuries. It also shows the development in the late 60s where new algorithms and things were being developed. And simultaneous with that was the development of hardware, moving from vacuum tubes to transistors to integrated circuits.
Well, we have some slides from the book, and we're going to take a look at some of those slides, and you can explain what they're telling us. Can we see that first slide, please? Okay, so there it is, right there. So what is that showing us exactly?
That's very important because when we started in computer graphics, everything was flat. We had flat surfaces, and we tried to make images out of them, but of course they were not realistic. And so that's a curved surface, and there's not a flat point on it. It curves in all dimensions. And the mathematics for developing that was extremely difficult to get right, and also be able to be efficiently executed on a computer. The computers, when this was done, didn't have much power.
And every time you pull on one of those control points, presumably that'll change the shape.
That's right. It's all interrelated, but it's interrelated physically correctly. So if you were strong enough and you could take a piece of metal, for example, and warp it, it would warp properly.
So that's a very basic element of computer graphics. Now we're going to see another element which is a little bit more complicated. Can we see the next slide, please?
Mr. Triangle Head. This is designed to show how we use the basic elements of geometry, which are triangles, and then we build up from that to quadrangles and so forth to form shapes. And you notice that there's lots of little triangles and some larger ones, and that's how we get the contours necessary for the shape that we're trying to reproduce.
All right, so everything you design in 3D graphics boils down to little triangles, essentially.
That's right.
And we have another slide that shows what that image looks like with skin on it.
Right, so this is the same exact face and the same construction, but now what we've done is we've painted it, toned it, and tried to get it to the point where it was so realistic that it would be believable, that you could look at that and ask yourself, is that real or is that computer generated?
Now, as part of the realism, you also have to consider things like lighting and texture. Yep. I think we have a slide that shows something about what's involved in lighting.
Ah, yes. This is ray tracing, and what's going on here is that we're using the computer to trace every possible ray of light as it reflects through and off of those spheres, and how those rays are influenced by one another and consequently influence what they touch. This was a very, very complicated problem. This was done back in 1980s. This was a speed-up technique done by Turner Whitted.
I'm sure it takes a lot of computer processing to do that, to figure out where the bright spots should be and where the shadows should be to make it look realistic.
Yes, yes indeed.
And once you master all these techniques of geometry and lighting, then you put it all together to make something that looks like a real person. We have a slide of that.
Ah.
Not quite a real person, sort of a pixie-ish person.
Yeah, could be a real person. But that's a simulation. That's Dawn is her name. And she was done by a company called NVIDIA to demonstrate the power of their graphics processor. And there's a whole lot of work going on here. And those little boxes, which of course you can't read, but they describe the type of work that's going on, the type of mathematics and coding that's necessary to do that. It takes a lot of processing time. Now you have to think about computers are making calculations 3 billion times a second. And so this particular image was generated in 16 milliseconds. So 16 times 3 billion, and you have an idea of the enormity of the calculations that go into it.
Because it's not just a still picture. This is going to be in motion, and it has to continue to look realistic as the figure moves.
That's right.
In fact, we have another slide which shows some of the things you have to do to make an entire scene realistic.
Yes.
So what are we looking at here? What is this a scene of, actually?
Well, this is a view of what's called a first-person shooter. It's a high-action game, and you are a soldier running through an area. And what this is showing is all the computational elements that are necessary to make the scene realistic. You have to be able to have buildings crumble, explosions, smoke. The sound has to be right. And what you really have going on here is a simulation, a real-time simulation. This is extremely difficult to do, and yet we're doing it on computers in people's homes.
Now, doing it for entertainment is one thing where people are passively watching something. There's also a lot of gaming where the viewer is participating and controlling the characters. Right. We have another slide that illustrates that, if we could see that one.
Yes. This is an illustration of a slightly different point of view. The previous one was what's called a first-person point of view. This is a third-person point of view. But you still have the ability to move this character around. And here again, the idea is to create a sense of realism. You know, we want to get the person looking at this to subconsciously ask the question, is that real or is that computer generated? And when you can't answer the question, then we've reached our goal.
And it's not just the realism of the still shot, but the motion also has to look very realistic.
Yes.
So do they model using live people and to figure out how this figure should move on screen?
Yeah, sometimes they do that. That's called motion capture, and it's used a lot in the movies. For example, this technique is used in the special effects in the movies, where you see people jumping through the air and flying, or you see them doing various types of fighting scenes and so forth. That's all done with motion characterizations, and then that's modeled in a computer based on those control points to give you a simulated effect.
Now we have another slide which looks like a flight simulator. Can we see that one? So this looks like you're sitting in the cockpit of an airplane.
Yeah.
And now, is this a game, or is this something that people could actually train on to fly real airplanes?
That's a funny point of view. Some people approach this as a game. It started out as a game. It was called Flight Simulator. Microsoft produced it for many years. But it has evolved to the point where private pilots actually use it for pre-training. And so this particular scene is the inside of a 747. I have another picture, which I didn't bring, I'm sorry, which is a real picture of a 747. And if you look at the two, they're difficult to tell the difference. That all the same controls and features are there.
Now this one, you can see that it's computer generated, but I guess realism is not always the main criteria. For some purposes, it doesn't need to be that realistic.
That's right. Yeah.
Unless it's maybe a movie and you're trying to convince people. But if you're training people on a device,
then it has to be very realistic. But back to your point about not being realistic, we have a situation in computer graphics where as we approach realism, we get to a certain point, and then it's almost real, but not quite, and it's what we call creepy. So we have to jump past that, and that's very, very difficult. So a way around it is to avoid the realism altogether and make cartoonish characters. And so we have things like Toy Story, for example, where the characters can move around and have a personality and be very much fun, but we're never disturbed by the realism of it.
You wouldn't mistake them for real life.
Exactly, yeah.
I think we have one more slide. which shows a picture of an astronaut. And I think this is from the movie Gravity,
Right.
which many people have seen now. So how much of this is real and how much of it is computer generated?
Well, you can see there's Sarah Bullock's picture. Her face is in there, right? Except that it's not. This is 100% computer generated. Obviously, we couldn't put her in outer space and take a camera and take her picture. So this is a total simulation of her in that mask. Now, mind you, we do little tricks and things in computer graphics. Only a little bit of her face is being shown there. The rest of the scene is capturing your attention and your imagination, we hope. And so we can get away with tricking you into thinking that's her.
Well, simulating a weightless state, that must be a little bit tricky to do in a studio that's based on Earth.
Well, it was, and if you've seen any of the outtakes where she did some of the stuff in water and she did it in airplanes where they hit a zero gravity point, yeah, that was pretty tricky. But in a computer, it's easy.
Now, we're looking at entertainment, we're looking at games, but I think that computer graphics have a lot of very serious purposes as well, some really useful purposes. What are some of the practical uses of computer graphics that affect our lives in important ways?
Well, just about every house that you have seen built recently is designed in a computer. Certainly all buildings are designed in computers. All cars, all airplanes, almost every product, in fact, I think I could actually say every product, your cell phone, your microwave, all designed in a computer now. And it has to be because the computer creates the accurate drawings necessary for manufacturing. So we now can create it in a computer and take that computer information and send it to a device called a 3D printer and create actual products from that without any human ever touching it.
It used to be that you had to draw things with a pencil.
Yeah.
And if you made a mistake, you had to rub it out.
Yeah.
And if you made a lot of mistakes, you have to crumple up the paper and throw it away. So,
Right.
So it sounds like it's increased our productivity a lot. We can get a lot more done because the tools are so powerful.
It's increased productivity, it's increased reliability, it's increased repeatability, and it's increased accuracy. So all vectors have gone up simultaneously to give us better products.
Now, I understand in the industrial field, everything is designed with computers nowadays. Everything is visualized. And things like virtual reality and augmented reality play a role there as well.
Yeah, virtual reality is a popular term now that has caught into the mainstream, but virtual reality has been with us for quite some time. It's been used mostly by the military in the past and in some surgical situations for surgical training. So we've had virtual reality soldier training for...
Now, virtual reality means that you're immersed in some computer world. To you, it looks real, but in fact, it's entirely computer generated. The whole scene you're looking at.
You've seen these pictures where people have these massive
helmets,
things, right?
yeah.
Well, one of the pictures that I should have brought, and I'm sorry I forgot, is the F-35 fighter. The pilot wears a helmet, which is all augmented reality and virtual reality, because they need to have lots of information delivered to them very, very quickly while they're flying this plane around.
So augmented reality as opposed to virtual reality is that you're seeing the real world, but you're seeing computer-generated information on top of it.
That's augmented reality. And,
Right.
and the name says it, right? It's augmenting reality for you, whereas virtual is taking you out of the real world and immersing you in a special place, a magic place.
So there must be a lot of military uses for that, as you say. It'd be nice on the battlefield to wear a helmet. Not only can you see the tank in the distance, but you can tell who makes the tank and what side owns it.
Yeah, you can do that, but
And
there's
where its weak
some
spots
practical
are.
applications too. One of the practical applications I like to talk about is welding. And think about putting this thing on your face. How much different is that than putting a welder's mask on your face, right? So you can, through computer simulation, have a virtual reality representation of welding, and you can put your fingers in there and run the welding tips and learn how to weld without burning yourself or using a lot of material in the process. And you leave, fully trained, knowing how to do that. And I point out that there's 20,000 unfilled welder jobs a year in the United States alone.
But if people could get training cheaply and inexpensively without
Exactly.
hiring a teacher,
Yeah, exactly.
now would this make teachers obsolete? Will this put people out of work?
No, the teachers will still teach you. They'll just use the virtual reality helmet instead of a welder's mask helmet.
I understand there are a lot of medical applications for imaging also. You can get pictures of the inside of the body and see things you couldn't see any other way, enhance the contrast.
And change the colors so that you can see the different parts more clearly. You make the heart red and the lung pink if you wanted to, or green, whatever color you should choose to do it. But that's also used for what is called surgical practice. We are so concerned about making mistakes while doing a surgery that the surgeons have to practice and practice and practice. And especially on delicate things, think about doing a heart transplant on a baby, and this gets done. There's a little tiny heart and little tiny veins that you have to cut, and you can't afford to make a mistake. And so they practice in a computer using virtual reality.
Now, is there an intersection between the computer graphics and robotics, where a robot is doing a lot of the work, like robotic surgery, for example? You, the human, are operating the robot using computer-generated images, close-ups, give you a lot of information. So you're combining the robotic part.
Yeah, in that case, the robot is, and this is kind of an augmented reality also, because in that case, the robot is supplementing your mechanical dexterity. So a robot can make very, very precise and accurate movements and get to precise locations.
Scaling your movements down, basically.
Right, and whereas a surgeon, especially if it's a very complicated surgery that's going to take maybe a couple of hours, anybody would get tired. The robot doesn't get tired, and it always makes a perfect cut.
Now, what is the limitation on computer graphics? Is it the processing power of the computer itself? Is that a limitation? Or, because right now graphics are extremely fast, motion on graphics is very fast, pretty powerful stuff.
Well, I have a saying that I like to use in moments like this, that in computer graphics, too much is not enough. And what that means is that we have yet to see the limit of computing power that we need for computer graphics. Until we can create a scene in real time of such realism that you absolutely cannot possibly tell if it's real or not, that's when we will have reached the holy grail of computer realism.
Are there any practical applications that we can't do just yet with the capabilities we have, but we expect to be able to do in the next 5 or 10 years or so?
Yeah, the entire industry has been on this exponential curve, which we refer to as Moore's Law. And because of an observation that Gordon Moore made some years ago about the increase in performance of computers and semiconductors. And as a result of that, we can project that law and say, okay, 2, 3, 5 years from now, we should have processors that will have a certain performance capability. If we had such a performance capability, looking backwards, what should we do? We run those types of scenarios every day, trying to figure out where we're going to go next and what we're going to do.
Is there some area that's just crying out to be affected favorably by computer graphics, like the next step, the next thing we expect to be able to accomplish?
Boy, there are so many. There are so many. The design aspects of airplanes, for example. How could we build an airplane that would go twice the speed of sound and safely take people from, say, England to Tokyo in a few hours? Could we do that? Assuming that the engines could be built. Well, wait a minute. Could we build those engines? We can simulate those engines. Yes, we could build them in a computer, and we can test them in a computer, and then we can test the aerodynamics of the airplane in the computer. And so things that we could do is we could increase transportation speed and efficiency by an order of magnitude.
Maybe we could also model atmosphere in a computer, because since you can't see air, it's very hard to know what the currents are. And birds fly by flapping their wings, and I don't think we quite understand how they do that. Because if we did, maybe we could make planes that did the same thing. Maybe there's something about the viscosity of air that we don't understand, which maybe we could model.
It's a possibility, and as for seeing air, there are places where we can see air, and it's not a good thing. But atmospheric modeling and going a step further into weather forecasting, what computers have done for us and computer graphics in the simulations have now made it possible for us to do accurate weather forecasting 7 days out. And it's amazing how accurate it is. Now, truth be told, that was stimulated by the need for the military to be able to predict weather so that they could conduct military operations. Nonetheless, they use enormous supercomputers and computer graphics to do this weather, and now it's prevalent all over All citizens now have access to this data.
A lot of computer development has been driven by the military. I mean, the internet essentially started as a military project.
Right.
Because I guess that's considered to be one of the basic needs to have a strong military. Now, since anything that can be turned into a weapon probably will be at some point, is there a danger that if the technology gets too powerful, it's going to end up killing us all as we turn it on each other?
Well, yes and no. I mean, you can run that scenario, and that's one scenario that you can run, but my colleague Kathleen Marr says that you can take any technology and they'll turn it into a game. And so very early in the development of computers, back into the 1960s, in fact, one of the first things that was done on computers was we made games out of them. We played ping pong on computers in laboratories at MIT. So you can have a death scenario with, a war machine, or you can have a fun scenario with computer games, and everything in between.
Yeah. And some people say that games are a waste of time. Too many kids spending their time playing these games, but games can also have a very practical purpose.
That's right.
They can train you in all kinds of useful skills, sharpen your reflexes in many ways, do all kinds of things.
That's absolutely correct, and that's been proven many, many times. Students who have had some learning disabilities and who have had some actual mechanical disabilities have improved their reflex time, their response time, even their micromotor skills. There's also been situations where people who have played racing games, and these are racing games where you actually have a little steering wheel that you hold and you can steer the car and look at the computer and so forth, that those people have improved their driving skills. Just like I mentioned the airplane simulator in training, you can do the same thing with a car, you can do it with a boat, a truck, anything that moves that you need to develop your skills and your acuity for watching what's going on can be improved by gaming.
Well, another whole field of interest could be the whole educational field. If with the right graphics, people could maybe grasp concepts a lot more quickly, like if you're teaching physics or chemistry, if you have impressive enough graphics, it'll be a lot easier than going through that musty old textbook with all those formulas.
That's absolutely correct. And again, there is a famous developer who did this. His name is Jim Blinn out of Caltech, and he put together a whole bunch of series on television where he did exactly what you just said. He showed the principles of physics and chemistry, by the way, using computer graphics to create the models. And it was a stimulating program because the graphics were attractive. So it was interesting to look at them, and at the same time you were learning about the laws of physics.
Yeah. And we'll probably see a lot more of that, and there are a lot of online courses you can take now. You don't even have to go to a school anymore, and pretty much anyone can teach these courses, although some of them have more prestige than others. And some of them do rely on fancy graphics to get concepts across. Like the difference, I guess, between the right brain and the left brain. Some people prefer images and some people like linear text.
Well, and let me just make a point about that also. This is a tech show, and we've been talking about tech, but in the case of learning in school, there are a lot of learning situations in history and in the arts where people are being taught how to paint, how to understand lighting for painting. People are being taught about history through computer-generated reproductions of historical events that are very realistic. And so they get a different sense of the history story when they can see models of how these people behave towards each other. And that has evolved then into games. There's a game now called Napoleon, where you can be Napoleon and fight his battles.
I've always wanted to be Napoleon.
Haven't we all?
Right. So this graphics could be used for fantasy fulfillment. It could be used for a lot of things.
That's right.
I guess.
That's right.
Hopefully it'll be used mostly for positive things.
It permutates our entire life. You can't watch a movie, you can't watch TV, you can barely look at your telephone, your smartphone, and not be involved with computer graphics. It is just totally all around us everywhere. The dashboard of your car. The next generation of cars will have a totally electronic dashboard. And you'll be able to design your own dashboard. You'll be able to say, I want the speedometer over here, the tachometer over there, I want this one red, this one green. You'll be able to do that.
So everything's going to be totally custom made.
Can be, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is very powerful stuff. It's really affecting our lives in ways that I'm not even sure that we know how it's affecting our lives, but it's going to have a pretty big effect.
We really don't. We can't fully predict it, but it's been a great ride getting here, let me tell you, and it's going to be a better one.
Now, we're seeing an increase of crowdsourcing here, where it used to be a few scientists working in their labs, But now with the internet, people can share information so much more quickly that the process of design is speeded up, like the whole maker movement, for example, where people get together and they put their heads together and come up with incredible things that previously working alone would have been very hard.
Yeah, and there's another aspect. You remember I told you about this Moore's Law thing, right? So in the process of Moore's Law working its way through time, we have had what we call a democratization of CAD, computer-aided design. It used to be, not so long ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, if you wanted to do a CAD design, you'd have to spend $10,000 to $20,000 on a computer. You'd have to spend $20,000 to $50,000 on the software. You'd have to buy an expensive monitor, and then you'd have to be trained on it. Today, you can do that entire thing for under $5,000. You can get a computer for $1,000 or $2,000. You can get a CAD program for a couple $100 today. You can get a monitor for $500, and the training is online, like you pointed out before. There's a program called .Linda where you can learn almost anything for a few dollars, and they have these nice short courses. And so to your point about the Maker Faire, you can buy this stuff, you can make stuff, and then you can take it to your local 3D printer shop and have them make it for you.
You know, we just have about a minute left. If a young person wants to get into the field of computer graphics, what would be a good place to start?
Almost anywhere. You can start as an artist. Think about all the art that goes into creating movies and computer games and designs of cars and the interiors of cars and things. You can start as a mathematician. All of this stuff is math-based. You can't make it work without mathematics. You can start as a hardware engineer. Someone has to design and build and manufacture the chips. You can start as a software engineer. This is all coded up. Just the opportunities are almost endless.
Okay, very good. And we're going to have to wrap on that note because I've gotten the signal. I'd like to thank you for being here today. Jon Peddie, president of Jon Peddie Research. You've been watching Future Talk. I'm Marty Wasserman. Visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. For Future Talk, we'll see you next time.